1 year ago, we explored the period in Superman history from 1986 to 1993 in our series Crisis Till Death. Now, the podcast returns to the Triangle era as we survey the post-Death and Reign landscape in comics, toys, video games, and television. This is Death Til Wedding, a new 7-part epic covering 1993 through 1996. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I am your host, Anthony Desiato. This is Death Til Wedding Part 4, and joining me to discuss the 1994 video game, The Death and Return of Superman, is returning guest and video game expert, Jeremy Frutkin. Welcome back.
Anthony, other podcasts are 8-bit, but here at Digging for Kryptonite, we're the full 16, baby. Let's go. Let's go. Good to be here with you again, my friend, as always.
I love it. I wish I knew more of what you just said, but that leads me to a great point for our audience here. I think we have all bases covered. So I will sort of be the voice of the uninitiated. I'm not a gamer. Video games were a part of my childhood, but only a small part. And I really haven't played video games in 20 years until my preparation for this episode. You, on the other hand, you play video games, you write about video games. So if you're into video games, I think Jeremy has the expertise and the knowledge that you'll latch onto. And if you are the uninitiated, I can sort of represent that perspective. So wherever you fall on the video game range, I think this episode will have you covered. As you know, as the audience knows, I'm always excited. I'm always excited for these episodes. This one is particularly special because this does represent something near and dear to my heart from my early years. And we'll get into all of that. But first, I want to congratulate you because since the last time you were on the show, a couple of major developments. You and your wife and your daughter welcomed a new addition to the family.
We certainly did. We have a baby boy, Winston, who's doing well and is happy and healthy. So yeah, a lot of changes. You know, there's going to be a day and a time where I replay and look back on all these episodes, especially over the past year, and the amount of changes that have been recorded at the beginning of our episodes when we're catching up has been truly remarkable. It's great that both you and, just as important, our whole community has kind of gotten this little peek in and check in with me over these months and over the course of this year to see moving to a new state, a new house, now a new baby. It's pretty cool, man. Pretty cool. Definitely exciting times in my life.
Yeah, well, congratulations. I'm so happy for you and your family. And I agree. It's really cool to have this record of the time, for myself as well, but I even think back more to the beginning of my podcasting journey with my comic shop history, from where I started there, it was a couple of moves ago. I was recently engaged at that point, but not married, didn't have a child. Like so much has changed. And, through it all, we talk about these things that we're passionate about. So congratulations on the new addition to the family, and also congratulations on the new job, which is actually ties into what we're going to be talking about to an extent.
Well, if you talk about more changes, right? I think we were done there with just the new child, the new son in my life. No, there's still more changing, all new, all different, some might say. So perfect timing. It's one of those things where, I don't know what you believe in, whoever you're listening there, but the timing, the universe, the cosmos, whatever you want to call it, really makes you wonder, because as big of a video game fan as I am, for the first time in 10 years, some of you probably remember I'm a teacher and educator by trade. My full-time job is actually now a marriage of education and video games, which is super cool. I'm currently working down in Manhattan with Concord Education, where I wrote their introduction to esports course and their introduction to game development courses. And we're partnering with schools, trying to get a bunch of their after school programs running for all sorts of different courses and classes across the board, academic help, academic support, student recovery, and super fun stuff, whether it's video gaming. We bring in professional video game players, esport players to coach people on Super Smash Brothers, Overwatch, Pokemon, Rocket League, all these games. And it's really fun. We even have an anime and Dungeons and Dragons club. It's really cool to see these students and communities get excited and just getting people excited about learning. It's a pretty cool thing.
I love to hear it. Congratulations on everything, and happy to have you back on the show. It's been a little while since we did our Super Friends episode, which was a lot of fun and well received. And there might be some follow-ups to that down the line. We'll talk off mic. So
wink.
Let's dive into the Death and Return of Superman video game, which I played on Super Nintendo when I was a kid. Now, all of the other episodes in this event that we're doing here, Death to a Wedding, they all deal with the comics of the post-Reign of the Superman era. But when we do these events, I do like to take a look, at least for an episode, at what else was going on beyond the comics. And in the first part of our event, we did talk about the Kenner Man of Steel action figure line.
Yes.
And so now we're devoting an episode to this video game. And this is a first for the podcast. We've never done an episode on a video game, which, I don't know, might speak to my taste or might speak more to the sorry state of Superman video games. Maybe we'll answer.
We'll talk about that. Yes, we'll definitely. You're onto something. But yes,
I think that'll be my last question for you. I think we're going to end on the question of whether or not this is the greatest Superman video game of all time, and whether that's a testament to this game or a sorry indictment of Superman video games, or a little bit of both. That's what we're going to end on.
Perfect. That will be the perfect end. Love it.
So much to talk about. I've been looking forward to this so much. Let me read a question from one of my patrons, because this will kind of tee up a lot of, I think, what we're going to talk about. So this is from Brian. Brian says, I remember this being such a hard game. My oldest daughter remembers playing it with me before Sega went the way of the dodo. Did you ever beat the game? My daughter watched one of the playthroughs on YouTube just to see how the game ends. Have you ever watched a playthrough? So I say to Brian and to the audience, this is digging for kryptonite. This is an amateur hour. I'm not going to come on here to talk about a video game not having beaten it. Of course I beat this game 2 times, baby. I just beat it a second time before we signed on for this.
Let's go. Did you hear that? Not once, but twice. Anthony, you set it up way too kind to me by calling me the quote unquote video game expert, when really at the end of the day, you're the one who beat it twice, not me. So I'm super excited to hear about your journey and your commitment, and your little updates you've been giving me as you've been playing really have just made my day. It's just, you love to see it.
Now, I know I talk a big game there, no pun intended, but the only way I was able to beat this, and I did ask for your blessing first, I won't lie, was with cheat codes. It was the only way. I sat down to play this, and I was like, I'm just going to do this. Like, I never beat it as a kid, but I'm going to make it happen now. I'm older. I have more focus, hand-eye coordination, whatever it takes to beat this game. It's like, I'm going to do this. I'm motivated. I'm doing an episode on this. I can accomplish this. And I got through level 1 with no cheat codes. And I was like, boom, here we go.
That's right.
I got into level 2 and I made it all the way to Doomsday, and I beat Doomsday. And I'm like, all right, I was on my last life and my health bar was like halfway there. And I was like, all right, I did it. And then it turned out I was only halfway through the level. Mm-hmm. And it was at that point that I realized there's no way in hell I am beating this game without cheat codes. And so I reached out to you, and you were very kind and you encouraged me. And so I did use infinite lives and infinite special attacks. And with that, yes.
You didn't use invincibility.
I didn't use invincibility.
Which I think is a completely reasonable and fair compromise. I think that's completely fair.
My feeling was I wanted to get through the game. Like, I wanted to friggin' play this thing finally all the way through. I mean, I'll talk about my experience as a kid, but at the time, I don't know, maybe I made it to level 3 or 4. I mean, like, this for my whole life, I'm like, how does this game end? So I knew I had to do this, but I wanted to I wanted to get through, but I wanted to preserve as much of the authentic experience as possible. And so I figured, well, infinite lives means I'm still getting hit. I'm still taking damage. Right. My health bar is going down. I'm still dying. It's just that when I lose all of my lives, I don't have to restart. I don't have unlimited time. So it's like I need to make up a little bit of time here. And so that allowed me to do it. And boy, what an experience. So I did it twice. I've played the entire game all the way through 2 times. Now, again, there's so much to get through here. But for you, were you able to actually play it and play it all the way through? Did you watch a playthrough?
Yes.
What did you
do? What I did is using the completely legal methods of emulation, which you can delete 24 hours later. I made sure I did everything the legal and above board way. I basically played for a while on my own and then did the same exact thing as you and entered in those codes, because guess what, folks? We are both parents. We are in our mid-30s. We are very, very busy people. And not to get too much in the weeds here, I'm trying not to completely bored a good percentage of our audience by getting too technical in the weeds here. But what you did is basically create a modern accessibility, and that's what it all comes down to, is that video games should be accessible, right? This game and many of these games of this time from our childhoods in the 80s into, I'd say, about the mid 90s lack accessibility in the modern features we have, like checkpointing, right? Where you're able to have a save point midway through so you don't have to beat the game in one sitting with your lives and your health bar as you get them, which I think is, what you did to me is a completely reasonable request, because you just kind of brought more modern standards and conceptions into this game, right? Because our time is valuable. We should be able to save and put it down and not have to sit there and do it all in one go. I mean, it's not going to happen. So I, very much after playing around, followed your lead on that one. And I'll also throw this in too. For anybody who's listening, they're going to, and our age, and even if they're not huge gamers, I'm willing to bet the majority of our audience will have an experience with what I'm about to say, which I love about gamers and just people our age in general. We grew up in a time with video games where developers legitimately, for better or for worse, and there are arguments to be made on both sides, did not care about how difficult games were, even games, sometimes especially games marketed towards children. Those of you, and listen, I want all of you who are listening right now to, when you're done, you can even pause after I say this, go on the Facebook page, go on Digging for Kryptonite's Twitter, come at me, j.remy on Twitter. If you experienced this, I want to hear it. If you played the Lion King game or Aladdin from this era on both the Super NES and the Genesis, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because Anthony, to this day, those games are still favored by modern speedrunners, because being able to beat that game and beat it quickly is such an impressive feat that people marvel at it. And still to this day, those games are so difficult. And you're a kid, same thing with this. It's the death of Superman. It's this huge, epic, once-in-a-lifetime event. You want to be involved in any way you can. You're a kid, and you play it, and you're dead in 20 minutes. So it's just, and again, there's the whole thing where you had to practice and take your time and get good. And yeah, on average, as kids, certainly we had more times to get good, as they say, and keep practicing. But also, how many people just gave up and never finished this game, and never finished Aladdin, and never finished Lion King? If anybody's listening has other ones, and I'm sure there are many other licensed games that are exactly the way I'm talking about, let us know, because it's a phenomenon that I've always been fascinated with.
I appreciate getting that perspective and hearing you lay all of that out. And, when I reached out to you and you gave me the feedback that you did, it made me feel better, because, I went into this thinking like, I'm not a gamer. I'm not good at this. This doesn't necessarily come naturally to me. So, when I couldn't even get through that second level, I was like, well, maybe this is just a me problem.
No.
So that's the thing, hearing from you, and then also, hearing from our patron, Brian, also Bernie, who was on the part 1 of Death to Wedding off mic. He and I were talking about this, because I was like, oh, this is one of the upcoming episodes. And like the first thing he said was like, oh my God, that game was so hard.
There you go, Bernie. That's exactly right.
So, that definitely made me feel better about all of this. So we'll break it all down. I will say, big picture, again, this game came out for Super Nintendo and also for Sega Genesis. From the little research I did, it seems like it came out first on Super Nintendo in 94, and then I saw 95 for Sega.
That is looking to be correct based on what I saw as well, too. I have some other interesting background information. Yep, I just double confirmed it with my notes here. That is Super NES in 1994, Sega Genesis in 1995.
Beautiful. And so this is the Death and Return of Superman video game by Sunsoft. And just my big picture takeaway, I really love this game. Again, and I'm not a gamer, and I know it's funny because I know video games have evolved so much in terms of graphics and playability and storylines, and they're so much more sophisticated. But, in my heart and my head, when I think of what a video game is, it's this side-scrolling, beat-em-up, arcade-style video game. Like, that's what I go to.
Look at you using genre terms, Anthony. Using those correct genre terms. You're exactly right. That's exactly it.
So thank you. Wikipedia helped a little bit. Look, once again, we're talking about Wikipedia. Just as a side note, man, when we did our Super Friends episode, we joked a lot about Wikipedia, and then afterwards it turned out they had let us down. There was a relevant episode that Wikipedia didn't dial us into, and I had to do a little insert into the episode. It all worked out.
As an educator, I'm constantly telling people never to use Wikipedia as a source. And it's one of those do as I say, not as I do scenarios, right?
So it goes. But this was a surprisingly faithful telling
Yes.
of the death and return of Superman. It follows very closely the storyline from the comics, from Superman's initial battle with the Underworlders,
Yeah.
through his battle with Doomsday and his defeat, through his resurrection.
That's Closter, right? Closter and his army.
Closter.
Yeah.
And
what? Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say certain aspects of the storyline are omitted. We don't get the Justice League, for example. We don't get Green Lantern. We don't get Mongol, though we do get the War World spaceship and the War Worlders. They're some of the villains that you have to fight along all the way through. But you get to play this game over the course of 10 levels as Superman, Eradicator, Cyborg, Steel, and Superboy. This is, as much as it's called the death and return of Superman, and that's an apt title, you could call this the reign of the Superman game. I mean, they get a lot of play. And here's the thing that I want to say, especially with everything that I've been looking at over the course of doing this podcast. And of course, you know, and the audience knows how much the death and return storyline means to me. Mm-hmm. With the exception of the recent animated movies, The Death of Superman and Reign of the Superman, which did give a quite faithful retelling of the comic book storyline. Whenever aspects of the storyline are adapted, usually you don't get the Reign of the Superman components. You don't get the 4 replacement Supermen. Mm-hmm. They're usually sacrificed. And a lot of times it has to do with, you know, there's not enough time. There's not enough real estate in the story to get into all of that. But I was thinking about it. It's like, this is one of the few examples like where you really got to see that and you got to play as all of those characters. There are a couple of things I wish we could have played as. Well, I'll talk about that. But overall, this was a very pleasantly, surprisingly faithful recreation of the comic book storyline. Like, I was kind of blown away.
I was floored. I really and truly was. I tried to remove all bias, either negative or positive aside, as I always try to do when we're such a nostalgia centric business that we're in here. I always try to look at this impartially, but let me start by saying this. The game, I think, is absolutely beautiful. I think the art is absolutely gorgeous. The music does a great job, a serviceable job as well, too. So the presentation, I think, still holds up and is still dynamite. I really do, especially considering the time period in which it came in. I think it's wonderful. And I thought that was going to be my biggest takeaway going in. However, my biggest takeaway is exactly, perhaps unsurprisingly, what you just said. This game was not made for a quick, cheap, and easy buck. This game was made by people who not only knew the source material, but I think it's fairly safe to say had at least some reverence or respect, if not a love for it. And it really, really comes through by being so faithful and even using the hardware limitations at the time to be able to produce something. Now, I'm going to use that as this little nugget that I've been dying to get out here. Now, this game was, as you so wonderfully said, developed by Sunsoft, who I'll always remember for their little bat logo, who I believe had a platform game of his own too. I'm sure somebody will mention in the comics. I want to say it's Arrow the Acrobat. See if I'm right later. So Sunsoft did develop it, but they weren't the only developers, Anthony. One of the other co-developers, I don't know if you came across this, was Blizzard Entertainment. Did you happen to see that?
Yes, I did notice that when the game loaded.
Now, to most people, maybe a lot of people, that might mean me much. But everybody who's like a real video game fan just heard me say Blizzard Entertainment and just went, are you kidding me? Blizzard Entertainment had a part in making this game. Anthony, even as a non-gamer, I could sit here and talk about Blizzard. All I need to tell you is that they went on a short few years after this, a very short few years after this. Actually, in 1995, and on, I think, is when development and everything got kicked off with this. They created one of the biggest video game franchises of all time, a game I'm sure you have heard of, even as a non-gamer, World of Warcraft.
Oh, how
about that?
I know World of Warcraft, but I did not know the connection. Fascinating.
So, yep. And they have so many other games that are just excellent. Diablo, Overwatch is actually, so one of the games they make is an esport game that my new job services as well too. And they actually just recently got purchased by Microsoft in a huge acquisition. And they're one of the biggest forces out there in video games. But the people in a snapshot who made this game would then also go on later to have a hand in making World of Warcraft. And when you see that level of care and love and detail and professionalism, it really, truly makes sense. I saw that and the light bulb went off and I just was grinning ear to ear. And it's really, really cool to see that. And this game was made by love and by professionals, and it still definitely shows.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on for this, because you can bring a lot of knowledge and insight to this that I wouldn't necessarily have. So you mentioned the graphics, and I guess that leads me to my next major section here about our video game histories, because like I said, video games were not a huge part of my childhood, but they were a part. So I was born in 1987. I remember being in like kindergarten and first grade and being over friends' houses, and they had a Nintendo. Like I remember playing Duck Hunt at friends' houses. I never had a Nintendo, and I was trying to think about this. I can't specifically remember my parents not wanting to get me a video game system, but it would track if they did, because as I've talked about on the show, my parents, my mother in particular, like was not a fan of me reading comics, right? She thought it would hurt my schoolwork. And eventually we got past that, but it took a long time.
Look at us now.
Exactly. But I would imagine she probably felt similarly about video games, I would think. So I never had a Nintendo. Again, I remember playing it at friends' houses, but I was really thinking about this. At the same time, I don't remember, it wasn't like everyone in my class had it. I just remember a couple of instances of playing it. In any event, I finally got my first video game system, and it was Super Nintendo, and I got it Christmas 1994. We were in our old apartment, the first place I ever lived, on East Hartsdale Avenue in Hartsdale. And I remember because we would later move to the house that I spent most of my time in that spring when I turned 8 in 1995. So winter 94, Christmas, I get the Super Nintendo. My first game was the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers game.
Of course it was, Anthony.
Of course.
If it wasn't going to be this one, it was going to be that one. Of course it was.
Of course. And I hope that our audience is checking out my current Power Rangers podcast series, Summoning the Zord. So if you want more Power Rangers talk, you can go over there. In any event.
Go get it.
So when I think about my time playing Super Nintendo, and that was the system that I had the most games for and that I spent the most time on, that Power Rangers game and the movie game from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, that was big for me as well, as was Mega Man X.
That's awesome. Very cool.
I was big into Mega Man X. And, I had like Super Mario Brothers, like I had all that stuff and I liked it a lot, but the Power Rangers and Mega Man and the Death and Return of Superman game, like that was really it for me. The Death game, it's funny. I have this memory. So my father's family is from Rochester, and like we would usually take a yearly trip up there. And I remember, and I had younger cousins, and I think one of them must have I have this memory of playing the game up in Rochester, and I'm almost positive it was before I got it. And actually, you know what? That tracks, because I think the date that I saw for this game was August 94 for Super Nintendo. Mm-hmm. So that actually makes a lot of sense. Like if we did a summer trip or something like that, and I played it up there, and then I got it that Christmas, something like that. I might be jumbling this, but that's as best as I can recall. And anyway, I had Super Nintendo. I had a ton of games for it. Eventually, I did graduate to a PlayStation. This is going to shock you and the audience, because I'm not a sports fan now at all, but
I'm already shocked that you owned a Super NES and a PlayStation. I'm loving this. Keep it going.
Wait till I talk about the PS2, baby.
One of the greatest systems of all time right there. Both of them, SNES and PS2.
But I had a lot of, it was the NBA All-Star game. I think that's what it was called or something like that. So I had a bunch of basketball games for the PlayStation, and I'm surprising even myself as I'm saying this, but I was really into skateboarding and snowboarding games. I had all like the Tony Hawk stuff and all that.
Yes. Tony Hawk those games are so important for two main reasons. One, because they are so much fun and impressive to play. And two, they gave us all of our taste in music, because the soundtracks in those games are unbelievable. Talk about licensed music. Nobody else except for maybe Grand Theft Auto has better use of licensed music in their games. Their playlists are just like a love letter to the 90s, and some absolute bangers in that game. Great choices. Now, the snowboarding, do you remember what you were playing? Was it SSX? Was it Tricky? Was it
SSX?
Yeah, there you go. That's a great one. Yep.
I mean, I remember them very fondly, and it was sort of like law of diminishing returns. Like, I had the most games for Super Nintendo, then a decent amount for PlayStation, and then I eventually did get a PS2. I think I only ended up with maybe a handful of games for that, including, I think it was the Spider-Man 2 movie game.
Yeah,
I want to say. But mostly at that point, I was using it as I think it was a Blu-ray player, right? The PS2?
So I'd have to double check. I know Blu-ray capability, and would make sense. I can just double check if you want. Let's see, PS2 Blu-ray player. Let's see what happens. So it says PS2 doesn't support Blu-ray discs, but it was able to support different kinds of digital video output ranging from MP4, MOV. So no, they're saying no, but it did have a bunch of different video settings that looks like past standard DVD.
I mean, maybe it was just a DVD player, but in any event, I remember just playing movies on it. So whether it was DVD or Blu-ray, that was largely how I used it. So again, at that point, I was kind of getting out of the video game scene.
Sure.
But those were the three systems that I had and that I played. But Super Nintendo was really the height of it. And the Death and Return of Superman game in particular really stands out for the obvious reasons. But going back to what you were saying earlier about the inability to save,
mm-hmm.
I remember there was a day, and I feel like, because I was with we're at my house, but I was with my grandparents. I feel like it was probably a day I was off from school, or I had a half day or something like that, and my parents were at work and they were there with me. And I remember playing the game and getting further in the game. Look, all these years, like decades later, and I still remember this. I know you know the feeling. I remember getting further in the game than I ever had before. And it wasn't that far into the game, mind you, but it was beyond what I had gotten to before. I think I was playing as the Eradicator. It's probably like level 3. It was, or level 4.
Right.
It was not that far into the game, but it was beyond where I had gone before. And I remember, I don't know, I had to stop it to go have lunch or to go out or something. And I'm not misremembering this. Like, you couldn't save.
No. Not by any now, if you use an emulator, you can use, for anybody who's still gaming, especially on Nintendo platforms, you might notice on Nintendo Switch Online, they have a bunch of these retro games from like the 80s and 90s. What's nice is, and they're kind of giving you permission, just like I did, quote unquote, is these things have fast forward, rewind, and save state modes built in. So you can create save states wherever you want, because a lot of those games just didn't have them.
So that was the thing. I guess I remember that moment. I think it was hard enough to get to that point, and then it was so crushing to have to just let it all go to get on with my day. And I don't know that I ever really went back to it after that point. And eventually, mm-hmm. I remember I gave my Super Nintendo and all my games to Bill Mayo from Alternate Realities, who's been on the show before, one of my buddies from the comic shop. I remember I was like, this wasn't all that long ago, maybe 2014 or so, when my parents were selling my childhood home. And I was like, listen, what am I going to do with these? I was like, do you want to play them? And he took them. Flash forward to now, when I want to do this episode, and I reached out to Bill and I was like, hey, like, if you still have it, I would love to borrow it so that I can play it for this episode. And unfortunately, he didn't have it any longer. He's gone through moves and various things, and he didn't have it anymore.
And all that goes. Yep.
That's how it goes. So I too did utilize an emulator. If there were another way to do it, I happily would. I actually, believe it or not, I bought that the mini Super Nintendo, the classic Super Nintendo.
Yeah, SNES Classic, yeah.
Which comes preloaded with like a couple dozen games, not Death and Return of Superman. I wish it did, or I wish there was a way through Nintendo to add to it.
It gets so tough. That's been one of the complaints about these retro kind of mini classics. There's been an NES, a Super NES, a Genesis, a PlayStation. You get a lot of the first party stuff, but it's so hard to get this licensing stuff because those deals for anything outside of kind of their in-house umbrella has expired years and years ago. And so it's tricky. I wish we're missing out on so many games. One of the other things in video games that's big is games preservation, as this has been around for a few decades now, and trying to make sure that these games just don't stay lost. So that's definitely a very real problem you're hitting on there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so I'm grateful for the emulator that allowed me to play this. And one perk of that, like you were getting at, is that you can save, although I didn't really need to. I basically did this, again, using cheat codes, and basically did this in one or two sittings. And actually, when I replayed it today, I did it in one sitting, and it took, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half or so.
It's pro gamer hours. Pro gamer hours, Anthony. That's you.
I suppose. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of sharing, my video game history and kind of where I'm coming from and what this game meant to me. I mean, certainly as a Superman fan, as someone who got into comics with the death of Superman, like this, this was huge, but this weird unfinished part of my video game history until now. Right. And to Brian's question, our patron, yeah, I did recently come across these playthroughs on YouTube, and that was cool. And before the cheat codes, I thought that might be as far as I got. I was like, well, and that's why, because I decided to do this episode. I was like, well, if nothing else, I can watch a playthrough, even if I'm unable to do it myself. But I'm glad that I was able to do it. I had a lot of fun, and I have to say that using those cheat codes, yeah, it allowed me to have fun. Like, I wasn't stressed playing it, because before, when I first started, oh my god, like I don't want to have to start again. And it was stressful. And this really just allowed me to have fun with it. So I'm a big proponent of the cheat codes. If anyone is like, I'm thinking about it, do it. It's so much fun.
One of the other big tenets of gaming, aside from game preservation, has been accessibility. And that's been a continuing advancement and debate and what still needs to be done. Anybody who's, talking about video games or read any of my writing or anything of that matter knows that almost to ad nauseum, my catchphrase is that gaming is for everyone, right? You don't need to be a pro gamer. Video games are for everyone, and they should be able to be enjoyed and played by anyone. There are plenty of people who say, well, you just have to spend the hours and hours and hours and hours and hours it takes to get good. They're allowed to have their opinion. However, I think everybody should have the option to enjoy a video game based on their abilities, based on where they're at in their life, and any other of number of factors. And that really is. I'm so happy you got to have this wonderful experience that you wouldn't have had otherwise. I actually think that's pretty cool and pretty special.
Yeah, and I know I messaged this to you, but I felt like I was 7 again. And
made me so happy.
For anyone listening to this, if you're not a gamer, if you have no connection to this video game, that's totally fine. But I'm sure there's something, I'm sure there's something out there that you do have that connection with. And that's what I experienced with this. Like, it took me right back. It was really special, and I'm glad that I took the time to do this and that we're talking about it now. Let's take a real quick commercial break, and then we'll dive into this more. We'll be right back. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated full-service comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina, for people of all ages and walks of life. Since 1983, this 9-time Eisner Award nominee uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material available. They pride themselves on their significant contemporary and vintage back issue selection. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available to anyone, anywhere, via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Film lovers and filmmakers should check out this family of film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and In the Cut in Bloomfield, New Jersey. I was fortunate enough to have my work shown at these festivals, and I found them to be very enjoyable and well-run events. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals generally, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news and updates about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, be sure to listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and currently under new ownership, Moose sells a wide selection of new and old comics from every publisher, action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Flat Squirrel Productions is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP, that's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions, to save 10% on your order, and it helps support the show. Thank you. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, which happens to be my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Aw Yeah. And we're back. So, Jeremy, for you, did you play this as a kid?
So I don't have any recollection playing this game as a kid. So we've talked about this before on one of our shows. It might have been even in one of the Marvel episodes we did way, way, way back, where I talked about how it's funny how my comic book journey went, where predominantly for the first part of my life up until late high school, but then really in college, I was almost all Marvel, right? And it was only because of my dear friend and fellow alternate realities patron Wolster Bone, who you've met and I've brought up here many times on the podcast. Really awesome. Was just like, dude, like you have to be reading everything. There's so much good stuff out here. That got me on board to be such a big DC fan and Superman fan. The point of all that is, even in this time period, the death of Superman was so big. I even had some of those comics around. It was just such a big, it was a cultural event. I'm pretty sure, and you would know this better than me, I'm pretty sure it was in the major news outlets.
Yeah,
it was everywhere. It really was like a moment in time and a cultural event. So all that being said, I didn't have the game. I was aware of it. I had all the other materials and all the information. But you know what struck me interesting? I wondered, I don't think there was, because I thought for some reason that this was also an arcade game, but apparently it wasn't. And part of the reason why these games are designed like this with no save points is they're based on kind of an earlier style and build, where the original arcade games were meant to be like this, because if it did have a continue system, you would have to keep putting in quarters, right? And like that's how they would make money. So maybe the fact that there was no save point and it was very difficult, ping that in my brain. But yeah, I got to experience kind of this now, which is really cool. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Listen, my pleasure. I'm so happy that you wanted to come along for this ride. So how would you like to do this? Shall we talk about the game level by level, character by character, setting by setting? What do you think would be best here?
I'm open for whatever you suggest. I have feelings and moments that jump out to me that I'm excited to talk about and share. But I'll leave it up to you. I definitely already have a favorite kind of part in mind that I'm excited to share. I think we already, in the very beginning, we talked about how faithful it is, right? And that being the tenet where it's really, really cool. If you've read this comic and know the story and you see this, it's like, wow, like to a large degree, you really are playing through that story, which for its time period is, or any time period really, is an amazing feat.
Absolutely. Well, let me just, one thing I meant to say this earlier, talking about the graphics. So with this emulator that I may or may not have, I may or may not have access, as the lawyer in me, I may or may not have access to the entire library of Super Nintendo games. And so I may or may not have had the opportunity to take a look at that Power Rangers game that I grew up playing. Allegedly. And playing that game, the graphics in the Superman game, again, they're a far cry from what, you would be playing now, but they were far stronger than what I saw in that Power Rangers game, for example. So I think certainly for its time, the graphics were strong.
They're timeless. And there's also been, and you wouldn't know this if you just are kind of like what we call a AAA gamer, right? If you're playing like all of the, big releases and big video games that are out, whether you're a lot of the PlayStation first party stuff like God of War, Uncharted, the new Halo, Elden Ring this year that are just jaw-droppingly beautiful and stunning. But there's been such a big renaissance in the past decade or so of indie game development where many games look like this because they're people our age. And they create video games that look how we remembered them looking, not how they actually looked. But same thing, when I played this, I was like, this remembers how I remember it looking, which to me means that this art is more timeless than a lot of its peers.
Right on. All right. So we'll see how we want to proceed through this, but what was that favorite aspect of it that you were getting at?
Okay. So stick with me here, because I think you're going to be with me on this and like this. So when we get towards the end, right, and Superman's back, and they're, he's rare to grow. Superboy breaks out of the spacecraft, and they're all heading, and Steel's with them, right? But Superman's back. We're getting the idea that, like, okay, Superman's back finally. And then when that next level starts, something that I thought was so cool is that's when you don't play as Superman. You play as Steel. And that might seem to somebody who maybe isn't familiar with the comics or maybe isn't dialed in on the details as a huge thing. But I thought that was such a powerful choice, because I felt like in a lazier adaptation of that story or this game, Superman's back. Finally, we get to play as Superman. You're playing as Steel, even though Superman's there. And you kind of touched on it in the beginning, because the death of Superman, to me, isn't really about the death of Superman, right? To me, it's about how do you do the impossible and fill the void that Superman has left. And there isn't a single answer, but they tried 4. And out of those 4, we got 2 that stood the test of time, that we still celebrate and respect, at least on the light side, for lack of a better term, to this day. And that was so cool. In a subtle way, they really kind of gave Steel his flowers in that moment. And I thought that was, I'm going to sound silly for saying this, but I thought it was beautiful in a very understated way, because they could have just been like, all right, Superman's back. Rest of the game is Superman, save the day, roll the credits. But it's not really about him. It's about those of us who have to pick up and carry on an impossible legacy, an impossible shadow, not because we feel like we're up to the task, but because somebody has to do the right thing. And that's what makes, quote unquote, unsuper people super in this case. And to me, that was such a powerful, subtle example of that. I don't think I would have picked up on that playing as a kid, if I'm being perfectly honest with myself. But that really struck me. I was like, that's such a deliberate and meaningful design choice that they put into this game.
Yeah, man. Well said. Was Steel your favorite character to play as?
Yes, I think so. I think so.
Was it the hammer?
I love that hammer, man. I love the reach and the range and the power that it gives you. It reminds me of, for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fans out there, Donatello is always notorious for having the best range with his staff, and it kind of reminded me of that a little bit.
It was like a moment of relief in the game to play as Steel, because you're right, with the range of that hammer.
Yep.
You were able to pick off the adversaries from a greater distance than the other characters, where you had to get in closer, and that extra space and extra time really helped. So he was a fun character to play as, but man, they were all fun to play as. I really have to say, like, I can't say enough good things about this game. And again, not to belabor the point, but it's really played more as a Reign of the Superman game. And, to your point, and I know we've talked about Death of Superman a lot on the show, the death storyline itself, I think, is very powerful and is very effective. And I've talked about how, even as a kid, even if I wouldn't have articulated this at the time or couldn't have, the fact that Superman was the only one able and willing to go the distance, right? That made such an impression on me. So the death portion in and of itself is very strong, but I don't think we would still be talking about it today if it's not for Funeral for a Friend and Reign of the Superman, because it's through those storylines that you get to see, through his absence, through the way he's remembered, through the way he's emulated. You get to see exactly what he meant and what he represented. And so to see the 4 Supermen, to see that storyline play out over the course of the game was really cool. I would say that Steel he probably was my favorite to play as in this, with that hammer, man.
It's so good. I love this first 90s incarnation of Superboy. I still remember that iconic cover of him with his back and him pointing with the arrow. His thumb pointing to his back, with his cool jacket on, his glasses, looking over the shoulder, being like, what? Like, as a kid, you're like, what is this? This is the new Superboy or Superman? Like, and he just was so 90s cool. And there was something too, I think, aside from all that bravado and all that, and of course, everything that would come later, there was just something kind of so endearing about you have, well, I was going to say, three men, but certainly, a cyborg being one of them, but three adults will say, and then ostensibly this kid who's trying to do his part. And I think there's, even if he's not perfect, even if it fails, even if there's a lot of shock and bravado, there's something so endearing about the impossibility and the infeasibility of a child ostensibly trying to fill the shoes of Superman, that a part of me has to root for him, right? Like, it's so unlikely and it's so striking and it's so improbable that you just want to root for the guy. So he also always has, especially that first incarnation, always has a special place in my heart.
Absolutely. There's a lot I like about the black t-shirt version, who's the product of, Superman's DNA and Lex's DNA. That's a compelling version.
I do like that. Yes.
But the version I gravitate to most is that initial incarnation, the one that we see brought to the video game here. So 10 levels. And
yes.
Again, over the course of the game, you get to play as Superman, Cyborg, Eradicator, Superboy, and Steel. Alas, you never get to play as Black Suit Superman. And I know, this is going to sound nitpicky because the game gives us a lot. But if there were one thing that I would have liked, I would have really liked to be able to play as the Black Suit Superman. I mean, look, pie in the sky wishes. It would have been really neat if there were a level where you played as Green Lantern fighting Mongol, because again, yes. the game gives you the destruction of Coast City. They omit Justice League, they omit Green Lantern, they omit Mongol.
I was still shocked that made it in there, though. I was actually still impressed just by that was in there.
I agree. And one of the things I made a note of was when you're playing in the, you're playing the levels where you're actually in the remains of Coast City, there are skeletons beneath your feet.
Dark stuff, man.
Yeah. Like, they didn't mess around with this. It's like, oh, okay. I was like, wow, like, that's pretty serious.
It's funny because I just got done for Concord Education's website doing a bunch of the ESRB ratings for the games. And like, I really wonder what that game would have been rated with like a modern sensibility as opposed to now, because it's a little less offensive in, of course, more of the pixel art style of the time, as beautiful as it is. But if you really take a second and think about what's going on, like, that's really dark stuff.
Yeah. So definitely I know you mentioned the music before. I love the music. How would you describe the music? I mean, it's like 90s techno, like how would you describe it?
Yeah. So a lot of the shorthand is like MIDIs, they call it, or a little past chiptune. Not chiptune is more like a little older than that. But yeah, I'd say like 90s MIDI, beat heavy music that gets you moving and kind of gets you excited to play. You want music to always be a compliment and not take you out of it, especially with the limitations of the day. And I'm a sucker for video game music. I'll give full disclosure here, being nerdy. If I'm working to this day, a lot of times I'll put on like video game music soundtracks just in the background. There's even like lo-fi beat versions of like video game soundtracks that are awesome, because a lot of the older music, and even now up to today, there's been some beautiful scores and beautiful music. They're doing such a good job of being powerful and understated, but you can still focus on what you're doing, whether that's the video game at hand or you're trying to get some work done. So this definitely fits that vibe completely.
I love it. Yeah, it's funny because I'm in my basement here, and when the AC is running, the HVAC unit is going and it gets loud in here. And when I was playing earlier, when that would happen, I would turn up the volume. Like you would think, especially for my second playthrough. It's like, I don't need to hear the music, but I kind of did, or at least I wanted to. So yeah, the music added a lot. Again, the graphics really, I think, for its time. And again, I mean, it's my perspective is skewed, right? Because I don't play the modern games, but so I look at it now, I'm like, wow, this looks great. I mean, I'm sure if I were coming from, Arkham Asylum or any of those current games, I'd be like, oh, well,
I was gonna recommend those games to you, and you know them already. Look at you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, totally ignorant of what's been going on.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to announce Twitch.tv Digging for Kryptonite starting right now. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll do that podcast at some point. I'll do a video game thing. I mean, I've long said, as my son gets older, if and when he wants to get into video games, that might be my return. Like, I would do it to play with him. I don't know that I would really do it on my own unless I were doing an episode like this.
Sure.
But I would. We'll see if he gets into it. Part of me is like, I hope he does, because it would be fun to play some of these games.
I'm going to be leaving little video games on your doorstep. I'm back in New York now. I can do it. I want you to know.
Beautiful. So the music, the graphics, the storyline, and there are these interstitial story moments in between levels. They're very basic. Basic. You get a static image. I mean, the camera kind of pans across it, but it's not animated, right? It's not moving. And you get text explaining what's happening, right? Like, Doomsday is attacking. Superman is the only one who can save Metropolis. And, so that sort of takes us through and moves us along. But again, the storyline was definitely a highlight. Being able to play as all 4 replacement Superman was fantastic. That really, I think, made the game for me.
That's one of the main reasons why I think it sets this game far and above, for sure. Getting even to play as each of them, even though there wasn't a black suit Superman, as you said, I'd like to believe that was because of limitations rather than omission. But I still, just being able to play as all of them just rings so true of the story, because just like they're all taking their chance and their shot at being Superman, we are too, as we play as Superman and we play as all of them. So thematically, to me, it's just, I can't imagine it going any other way.
Yeah, no, for sure. The last thing I'll say about Black Suit Superman, it just it broke my heart, because the final level begins with, I don't even know what you call it, where it's sort of playing out, but you're not controlling it.
A cutscene.
A cutscene. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Like, I'm learning so much. So... and it starts out in that cutscene at the beginning of level 10 with Cyborg blasting Superman, but Eradicator jumping in front, and Eradicator channeling that energy and changing it such that when it hits Superman, it restores his power and costume. Which
Eradicator did good. He did good.
He did. He redeemed himself in the end. Mm-hmm. And look, Superman wouldn't be back to life. He wouldn't be in that rejuvenation matrix had it not been for the Eradicator. So Eradicator had a very important part to play.
Often looked over. He definitely is the weakest of the 4. Fair to say?
I think that's fair to say.
Right? Fair to say. I don't think too many people would push back when dealing with like the later on importance too of all the 3 other Supermen, you know, but it's true. That's important what you just said. It's still worthy of note and worthy of mention, his sacrifice.
Yeah, absolutely. But, as I'm watching that, I'm like, what that's how the game should have ended in my mind, right? Like, the last level could have been playing as Black Suit Superman, and it ends with that moment, but it's fine. It's not a big deal, but it was just like, it was so close.
It was right there.
But one of the other things that I really liked about this is, as you're playing as each of the characters, you've got the basic moves like the punching and the flying, and certainly I guess we can talk more about moves, but my go-to was certainly jumping up and then, sort of launching yourself at the adversary that you're fighting. That was a very effective way, I found, to try to, make the most of your time and your hits.
I love that, because I feel like in this genre of beat 'em up, or as they call them in Europe, belt games, because it kind of runs horizontally on a belt, which is I thought was interesting terminology. 100%. So again, I'll bring this to Connect, I promise. But a few months ago, actually, they released a game called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, which was, I believe it's I Am 8-Bit. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. That made this game. I absolutely loved it. It's one of my games of the year this year. It's phenomenal. But like what I just said about all this indie game love, they basically made a modern version and homage, if not a sequel, to Turtles in Time from when we were kids. And one of the most effective methods in that game and in this one is your jump attack. And that's exactly what you're describing right there. And as I'm sure you'll agree with, you need to do that, especially if you don't have lives invincibility, because you can't just stand and get hit as you're getting hit. You have to be maneuverable if you want to save your skin. Doing jump attacks accomplishes both of those. So I think most people would agree in these styles of games that is probably the most valuable move, aside from special moves, of course, that you're going to come across. So I'm in full agreement with that.
Absolutely. Well, and that's a perfect segue. So in addition to those basic moves and the jump moves, the jump attack and being able to fly, each of the characters has a blast of some sort, right? So as a standard move, right? So Superman has his heat vision, Steel has his blaster, Cyborg, they all have a similar version of that. But then there's the special attack. You only have a limited number of those unless you have a cheat code. And I will say, especially on my playthrough, I was a little more generous with those because I was like, all right, I gotta like, it was literally in advance of this recording. I was like, all right, I gotta get through this. And there were points where I was like, I don't really need to fight these war worlders anymore because I kind of get the gist of it. But
clear them. You just want to clear them.
You just want to clear them. But you have these special attacks, and they were really cool. Superman flies up, and then he lands hard. He punches the ground, and and he disperses everyone. And each of them has a version of that. The Cyborg one was particularly badass from a visual perspective. It's like if you look up that pinup art of the Eradicator from Reign of the Superman, like standing there with the like in shadows and the glowing hands, it's like that's the effect that it gives you as he radiates this energy. Like it's so cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I think my favorite actually might have been Cyborg Superman, like you said. I grew on to love that character, especially with all the involvement he had. Especially it's funny, right? Because he starts off here, but he very much is firmly from destroying Coast City, and then in so many huge Green Lantern events and beyond, is just such a wonderfully despicable villain. It's funny because I really do, and I wonder if you'd agree with this. I almost think of him as a Green Lantern villain now, as much, if not more so, as a Superman villain. But that aside, I love him. He's up there with like some of my favorite DC villains, and there's also just there's something so amazing about his look, because even compared to the other three, when you look at him and you see that part of Superman is mechanical and a robot, you're looking at something that just should not be. And there's like a bunch of kind of like my love for Metallo. I think we're seeing a theme with me here and these robots, maybe for longtime listeners, but you're looking right. There's a callback, right? The people who watch that show and watch this one are laughing right now. I promise you. It's that body horror, right? You're really just striking like, whoa, that's not right. That shouldn't be. How did that happen, and how do we stop it? And I thought they did a good job of capturing that even in this game as well.
Yeah, no, this is a separate conversation, I guess, but I am with you. Ultimately, I think of him as a Superman villain, but I agree. I think there's a very strong case to be made, and I think if you were really crafting an argument, there's probably a stronger one to be made for him as a Green Lantern villain.
That's right.
We'll see as we make our way through this event and when we eventually cover the Electric Superman, like the rest of the Triangle era. But I certainly got to a point as a kid, at least. Again, I'll see how I feel as an adult revisiting this. But as a kid, I think I got to a point where it was like, I wasn't particularly excited when Cyborg Superman showed up in the books.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in part, a la Doomsday, it's like when that initial story is so strong, so effective, so big, it's hard to top it. But I thought that in more recent years, although I guess not so recent anymore, time goes very quickly.
That's the truth, brother.
The way that he was reintroduced in the Sinestro Corps War and really made a part of the Green Lantern mythology and the Green Lantern Rogues Gallery.
Love that story so much, but continue.
Like, it just works. Like if you were to say like, oh, I really think of him as a Green Lantern villain first, it's like, yeah, no, I get that. There's something very compelling about that. And so his special attack was a bomb, right?
Yeah. Yep. There was a certain aggressiveness to his play too, that I felt like where all the others, you have the range, you have the flight, you have all of that as well too. But there was just something more aggressive about the play style to me of Cyborg Superman, which really fit, which again, I think also plays into the love and knowledge that was put into this game as well.
Well, along those lines, one of the moves is a standard move, but with Superman, for example, you can grab one of the bad guys and throw them. Mm-hmm. And they each have a little different spin on that. Like with Superboy, it's almost like he's flipping them. Mm-hmm. Like there's more agility involved in it. And I think I might be conflating these. I might need you to help me to sort them out. But is Cyborg the one where like you grab them, they basically like bash them by the head?
Yep.
Right? And then
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
And then Eradicator, you like break them over your knee.
It's very violent. And it's funny because like if you look at like their kind of alignments for the majority of the time we know them, again, that's how you can tell this game was crafted with knowledge and care, right? Just those details about their play styles, even if you didn't know the story. And let's just say, like, I don't even know how this would happen, but I suppose it could very logically happen that somebody just got this game like back in the day and didn't read the comics and played it. You imagine playing that and seeing the hit over the head or the I almost called it a Bane-esque break over the knee.
But
yeah, that's exactly what my mind goes to. Imagine seeing that and being like, no, Superman doesn't do that. Like, that's not right. And like, that's all you need to know. Like, there's something not right here with these two would-be Superman. And that's why I think it's cool, because even if not reading the comic, you would still get a pretty interesting story and a decent amount of it from playing this game. And that snapshot, I think you summed it up perfectly with those details.
That's the thing. Like, that really stood out to me. I was as I was playing this, I was like, yeah, I mean, that tracks exactly with who these characters were and how it played out in the comic, right? Where with both Eradicator and Cyborg, same type of thing at play, where this was the super but not the man, right? There, you didn't have the humanity. Eradicator was all Kryptonian.
I love the way you just put that.
Right. And of
super,
course,
but not the man. Yeah,
right.
That's exactly right.
And Cyborg, I mean, in addition to ultimately being a villain, but even putting that aside, the fact that he's, part machine, there's that heart of the character that's not there. So the fact that their move was more brutal, more vicious, more punishing, totally tracked. And again, going along with the storyline, the fact that the first level you play as Eradicator, the boss is Steel.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
Right out of the comics. And, I revisited all of this just a year ago, so it's still relatively fresh. And, I thought it was one of the highlights of the Reign of the Superman for me when those two faced off, and it sort of, helped turn Eradicator around a little bit, where it's like, all right, I'm not necessarily, on the right track here. So it was, yeah, man, like it really, I agree. If you just play this game in a vacuum, it gives you, I think, a lot of the core of the storyline. You don't have all of the beats necessarily, but you kind of, you get the spirit of it.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm not telling people to not read the comic and just play this game, but instead it's a badge of honor and a testament to the work that was put into this, that you could have a complete experience. And yeah, like you said, I think kind of the broader stroke and core understandings of what exactly happened during this saga.
So since I took all these notes and I played it through twice, let's do a quick run through of the levels. Well, I won't, I won't keep people here all day with this, but
you're our resident expert. Let's go. Let's do it.
I reject that title, especially when it comes to video games, but thank you nevertheless. So level 1 is Siege of the Underworlders. So this comes right out of the very beginning of the Death of Superman storyline, which, it was only after last year's event when I read all of the comics leading up to Death of Superman that I came to appreciate this more. Because as a kid, it's like you start off with these underground monsters. It's like, what is all of this about? But, I have greater context for it now. And I think it's a great way to kick off the game. And it is the easiest, probably the easiest. One of the aerial levels later on in the game I thought was relatively easy compared to the rest of it.
Yep. And this was, I think, usually, the first area or level of a game should be easier, and especially in lieu of like a formal tutorial. A lot of times these kind of serve as that. But yeah, I thought it was the easiest, and I thought it was fine. The thing that stood out to me is what we've kind of hit on already too, is right from the beginning, we see that this is a faithful adaptation, right? Which is really, really cool. We're starting where it starts, so to speak.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like I appreciated that. I mean, and you can say, well, he needs someone to fight at the beginning. It's true, but you could have gone right into the battle with Doomsday. I appreciate that.
They could have had him beating up bank robbers.
Yeah.
Instead, they decided to be faithful, so I give them a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, so you fight Rambo, blue and red versions, Igor, Tick, and
what's your favorite Tick story?
Yeah, I don't have to dig through the back issues and get back to you on that.
Amazing.
And then our boss is Clawster, and you're sort of making your way through this like industrial area of Metropolis, and then there's an elevator portion of the level, and you have your final showdown. It's, again, relatively standard, but at least it gives you, like I said, relatively easy compared to what's to come, and I think it helps you get your bearings and learn the game and sort of learn the basic functions of it. And
I agree. It serves its purpose, and it's faithful. And
it really sets the template for what's to come, because basically, the settings will change right as we move forward. We'll get to the streets of Metropolis, the rooftops of Metropolis, the skies above Metropolis. We'll go into Cadmus. We'll go to Coast City, to the remains of Coast City. We'll go into the engine of Coast City and all of that. But in terms of who you're fighting, at each step along the way, the basic archetypes are set here. So,
Yep.
Later on when you're in Cadmus, you're fighting the elite and the defender. But again, still all sort of following the same basic archetype. And when you're in Coast City, you're fighting the war worlders, and again, all in the same vein.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of the games, even to this day too. You don't want it to be just like they're putting new skins on the same archetypes, even though a lot of time in this era is what's happening. But that's essentially what's happening, right? Different enemies, and it's not even necessarily being lazy. I would chalk it up to the limitations of the time, but also the idea that the player can only learn so much, especially in a game like this. So if at least these enemies are coming at you, you can say, oh, okay, I know that this is this type of enemy. This is how they're going to attack. I need to do X, Y, and Z to either dodge, prepare, or attack back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So, that sort of gives us our first level there. And then with level 2, we get right into the Doomsday action. Now, like I said earlier, this level frustrated me because it was really, I felt like it was 2 levels in one. I mean, you're fighting Molotov and Chainsaw. I'll circle back to them in a second. But, you're fighting them in the streets of Metropolis. Then you have this battle with Doomsday and you think you're done. And then you're back to the streets of Metropolis fighting these guys again and then having a rematch with Doomsday. Now, I'm of two minds here. Because on the one hand, I do have to tip my hat to the developers because it's like, you want to build up Doomsday as this massive threat. And so if he's just a standard boss you fight once, doesn't necessarily have that effect. I just feel like maybe it could have just been its own level. I didn't like the fact that I felt like I was done and I wasn't.
I would have rather had an entire level fighting Doomsday various times and in various forms in various locations.
Thank you.
I think that would have you've never played any of the Injustice games, have you?
No. Only watched that movie. That was it.
Yeah, I know you're familiar with that. But so same developers that made the Mortal Kombat games. And again, stick with me here. This is going to something connect. Something cool in those games in the more modern reiterations, when you're in a fight, you can break open the environments and the level you're in will turn completely into a new one. And I would love if we had like a simpler version of that with the Doomsday fight. Like they both, they both get knocked over and suddenly they're above ground. Maybe they're now this portion you're in the sky to really get that epic feel. I'm also going to throw this in here too, because we talked about the art and I don't know when else to bring this up. I think this is a good time. How about the box cover? Not that it matters for us the way we played. The box cover art is so striking, isn't it? I mean, just the bloody fist through the Superman logo. I mean, my goodness. So Doomsday certainly is a force, and you can tell just by looking at the cover.
It's the cover art is iconic, and again, even in those interstitials that I was mentioning before, when Doomsday arrives, on that static image, and you see him in that green containment suit as he's sort of breaking free, and then ultimately later after Superman dies, and you see Lois holding him in her arms, it utilizes that core iconic imagery from the comics to great effect. I agree with you. That was the kind of my main critique of level 2 was like, it's funny. Level 1 was amazing. It's like, wow, what a great pull from the comics using the Underworlders. But the fact that Superman is fighting these like street level gang members, essentially along the way to Doomsday and in between Doomsday, it's not from the comics. I agree with you. Like, I think it would have been cool if it was just a prolonged battle with Doomsday. And like, you can start off like Doomsday can be easier, early on in the level and get harder as you go along and fight in different environments. I think that would have been the sweet spot for that level and would have really taken it to another place. But it was, it was solid as it was, but it was just like, what is the deal with these guys?
And it also would have challenged the sensibilities of the day, especially too, right? Where you can't have the Doomsday fight be later because it doesn't make sense in the story. But just having played video games at that time, you beat an enemy, you move on. I think it would have been so cool to beat Doomsday. Imagine being a kid being like, okay, next level. And the game almost leads you on like you're going to the next level and Doomsday gets up. And can you imagine that moment as a kid being like, no, like I'm supposed to be at the next level. I beat him already. Like and that dread really ties in thematically as well too, to that whole fight and what happened. So yeah.
I know that would have been really cool. It is what it is. Again, I appreciate the position they were in, because the story was not designed around multiple villains. Like the whole point was Doomsday shows up and this is the one who takes everyone out. So I know they had to figure out something, but I think what we're conjuring, would have been stronger. I will say though, I love their Doomsday. I mean, he was, he was tough to fight. He was fast. Like I guess all this was true for most of the bosses that you fight. I mean, it's like, if you get pinned in the corner, like you're done.
Yeah.
Like you're done.
Yep. The game is, you wouldn't necessarily think of it, but I feel like the game has such a focus on evasiveness.
Yeah.
And it's more important first to be quick and be aware, as opposed to just, I'm super strong and, slugging away. And I think you're absolutely right. If you get stuck, it's a very chance that you're going to lose a life pretty rapidly and pretty quickly if you're pinned in a corner, as you said.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate the brutality of Doomsday, and this was such a little touch, but Doomsday laughs.
Yeah,
and again, right from the comic, and Bernie and I a few episodes ago we talked about Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey. I don't think we even touched on this. I meant to, but like Doomsday starts to form some words in that story, as he's continuing to evolve, which is interesting. But yeah, I loved the laughter. I mean, it really added to the menace of the character and was straight from the comic. I thought, I guess ultimately that's my quote unquote complaint about the level. I just wanted more Doomsday. Yeah.
We wanted what was advertised on the tin, so to speak, right? We wanted more of that and more Doomsday, but it's easy for us to, it's not even, Tuesday morning, Monday morning quarterbacking here. It's several decades later quarterbacking, right?
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, no, that's the thing. I again, very happy with this game. Just to reiterate, and so you get to, of course, you have to beat Doomsday, but then once you do, right? Yeah. You lose control, and Superman and Doomsday punch each other, and are both down for the count. And at that point, Superman has perished, and that leads us into the reign of the Superman portion.
3 months later, right?
Yeah. So we get to see again through the art in between the introduction of these characters, and then we get into the gameplay where you're playing as each of the characters. You start off as Cyborg. This was. Look, again, as far as the storyline and being faithful to the comics, I mean, this next level 3 as Cyborg, you're infiltrating Cadmus Labs to steal the body of Doomsday.
It's one of my highlights of the whole game. One of my other highlights of the whole game was this level, this experience. And again, just seeing Project Cadmus in a video game, seeing it be like this faithful, like if you're a DC comic fan and you've read this story, you're going to be popping like big time for this whole thing. Cause boy, it is some real accurate fan service. Also, this perfectly lines up what we were saying before too, especially about Cyborg Superman rather. What's so interesting to me is that he's the first one you play as, right? So his mission is not, I'm the new Superman. I need to protect people. I need to make a difference. His first mission is, I need to go get rid of Doomsday while he's down to make sure I don't die again. Just like again, you know what I mean? Just like Superman, the real Superman did. And I think especially as a kid, if you're just playing it for the first time, you might not think anything of it. But if you know the story, or if you're older and playing like us, just like those violent moves were an indicator. His mission, as soon as you see him, the very first one, is an indicator that maybe something's not quite right with this Superman if his first mission is to ostensibly banish, if not kill, another living thing. Not because he wants to protect the world again, but because he's worried that the same thing could happen to him.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you. You're right. I mean, there are a lot of choices here that I think when you really think about them, and assuming as much thought went into it as we think there was, it really does create this effect. So yeah, I think it was a very smart decision to have Cyborg be the first of the ones that you play as. And, there's a lot going on. I mean, this level has multiple components. I mean, they all do, but the fact that this one starts as an aerial battle, right? Yeah. As you're flying, which was, again, a different way to play. I mean, again, you can fly as all of the characters, and there are certainly instances in the various levels where you would want to fly, like when you're fighting the War Worlder, or later on in this very level, right? When you're fighting the Elite from Cadmus, who can fly, where you want to utilize this, but this was a fully aerial section where you're just flying the entire time. You have no choice. And what this was, I thought the aerial sections, because you do this a bunch of times, and Superboy has a key level later on where he has to stop the missile from getting to Metropolis, and that entire thing is aerial. I thought these were surprisingly easy compared to the rest of the game, and they gave you far more extra health icons than you found anywhere else in the game. What did you think of that?
I don't presume to know, what was going into the, game developers' mind. I can only make educated guesses in good faith. And my would be it is extremely difficult today, let alone then, to incorporate different gameplay mechanics and different gameplay styles into a game that already has them well established. And they're basically saying to players, hey, this is different. You might have to learn how to move in a different space a little bit here. So maybe they'll throw you, again, we didn't get save points, but they did throw us a little more leeway, it seems like. Again, throwing it back to all the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games, kind of a similar genre, and even to Shredder's Revenge that came out this year. I always did find, for the most part, the same thing is true. I never really had too much of a trouble on those, surfing, skateboarding, flying, hovering levels. Right. And I really wonder if it's consciously a little bit of a sympathy play from the game developers being like, hey, this is going to be completely different. Instead of having you just die here in an extremely unfair death because you aren't quite familiar with this kind of new maneuverability and environment. I would like to think that maybe they were a little more generous. And if it was just, it's a little easier, you'd say, well, maybe. But the fact that, and you hit the nail on the head, there definitely does seem to be more health items and power-ups in these levels. It really does kind of make me believe that that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely my takeaway playing it. They were a lot of fun. And when I say easy, it's like, I guess once you recognize the pattern of, these objects coming at you and they're firing, but they all kind of go in a pattern. And sometimes they come in from up top and sometimes they come from the bottom. I found, and yes, I recognize with Infinite Lives, that I had that going on, but even still, I don't know that I even died at all in this portion. And it was just once you knew the pattern, and basically what I found, as long as you just kept firing the whole time, that accomplished a lot. And then again, if you could sort of anticipate which direction they were going to come from, I mean, there were times you could just kind of get in the right position and just go right under or over them.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And that's a lot of what these games are, pattern recognitions. And I think it's much easier to recognize the patterns of, even though they're moving, static objects isn't the right word, but they're moving in a fixed formation, kind of at these enemies that are coming at you horizontally quicker. I definitely am 100%, at least for my mind, I think it's easier to kind of recognize these patterns in that more open space and be able to kind of maneuver around them. So I think you're onto something there.
And as far as strategy generally, actually, this is a larger point, not tied to a specific level, but this game gave me greater appreciation for why people play video games generally, and especially why, people like yourself, like you continue to play them, because it really does. I really admire the strategy that you needed to cultivate. And look, though I don't follow the sport of boxing, I sure do love the Rocky movies. And, that came to mind a lot too. Like, how do you engage an opponent, and, what position do you need to be in? How quickly do you need to move? Like,
you're talking about esports, Anthony. It's exactly what you're talking about, which is really cool. It's exactly right.
Yeah. It kind of unlocked something for me where it's like, I don't know that, again, I don't think I'm going to become a gamer tomorrow. Like, podcasting is, I think, what, if I weren't doing this, maybe I would, but this is where the time goes. But
keep podcasting. On behalf of everybody, we need you to keep podcasting. So if we have to choose, you're doing it right.
Thanks. But it just gave me greater appreciation and understanding for it, which was really cool. And as far as strategy and the other levels, because again, like we were saying, you're sort of seeing the same sorts of archetypes and the bad guys that you're fighting throughout most of these levels. And like we said before, I think the jump attack was definitely clutch. I think when we get to the point, including in this level, when you're fighting the Cadmus soldier who can fly, I found taking out the flyer first made the most sense, because when you're up there, you're generally safe from the ones on the ground. And the flip of it is, if you're trying to fight on the ground and you're getting, pelted from above, that doesn't bode well. Did you find that as well?
100%. Well, what you're doing is, and that's why it's so impressive, people who are truly masters of their game of choice, or several games just in general, because you're making those split second decisions, right? And you need to eliminate, at least in my estimation, right? You need to eliminate the greatest threat, and that also has the most amount of time to get to. Right? It's like that equation that people do in a split second in their head almost. It's why they always say, take out the snipers first when you're playing a game. That's what I always hear when I'm playing a game, whether it's Halo. I'm a big Halo fan myself as well too. But I'm sure that applies to Battlefield, Call of Duty, all of those games as well too, because the idea is that if somebody can hit you and you can't immediately hit them, you are in a lot of trouble. Everybody else, if you're on the same plane, you at least can maneuver around, hit back immediately, whatever your particular strategy is. But if they can hit you and you can't hit them, you're going to be in a lot of trouble if you don't close that gap.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, taking care of the flyers first, the jump attack, those special attacks, especially unlimited. But I did use those sparingly, especially the first time that I played through. I really only did it if I really just wanted to move on, or, usually that was it. I mean, for them, I didn't use them too often, because typically if you use those during the, fighting the regular baddies, that usually takes out whoever is there. Mm-hmm. If you use it fighting a boss, you'll need to do it a bunch of times in order for it to actually stop them.
I'm not going to get us derailed here too much, I promise, but I got to throw this in here too, just because we're talking about special attacks and comic book games. Did you ever play by any chance Maximum Carnage or Separation Anxiety on the Super NES?
Yes.
Similar. I have great love for those games as well too. I'm sure a lot of our audience also does as well. My point being is, I think those are still my favorite specials in the game, because do you remember how cool it was to use a special and call another character in to come help you? Like you could call in Captain America or Hawkeye to come help you. That pinged that memory in my brain. I was like, man, that was so cool.
So at some point in the future, probably years from now, when I do my Spider-Man podcast,
there we go.
I'll call you in and we'll do our Maximum Carnage.
Woof, I can't wait. Anthony, that's two. Those are two players also too. So we might have to try to get something going with that.
We'll circle back to that.
Awesome.
And then the other thing too, just as far as strategy, certainly being able to pick up objects in certain instances and throw them, that helped. It was also cool, and we'll get back into the level by level, but just I wanted to to sort of talk about this a little bit. What I liked about this game, as hard as it was, and when we say hard, it was just, again, especially as you get deeper into the game, the amount of adversaries coming at you at one time with different modes of attack, it does become a bit overwhelming.
Yes. Your processing speed goes from quick to, honestly, almost impossible, at least for mere mortals like myself, compared to the people who are truly, it just becomes a numbers game at some point.
Side note, audience, if anyone out there, if you've beaten this game without cheat codes, please reach out. I would love to shake your hand virtually, because it'd be astounding to me.
You have our eternal respect for sure.
But what I thought was so cool about this is you can use the villains against each other. I mean, you can literally pick them up and throw them at each other, which is cool.
Love it.
But like Molotov, for example, when he throws his Molotov cocktail, like if you get out of the way and there's one of the other bad guys behind you, like it'll hit them.
Which is such an advanced mechanic that is just wonderful. We see that, a lot of times today, but I love that, because not only does it add a sense of realism, but it also adds another layer of strategy, right? Where you can actually damage another enemy by not attacking, but by just that evasiveness. It goes back to my point I made, where I really think that the central core combat of this game is situational awareness and evasiveness. Right? Compared, and attacking actually comes second, at least in my estimation.
I think that's fair, man. I really do. And I will say, one of the things that frustrated me, there are a couple of instances in the first level when you're playing a Superman, and later on when you're in Coast City, when debris is falling, I could never figure out how to avoid it. Totally.
And do you think it's because the fall speeds are faster? Or because the patterns are more irregular, or maybe a combination of the two?
I don't know. I think it's my own limitations. Although, actually, you know what? I did get better. I think the first time it happened, I was just like, where am I supposed to go? And then I realized, okay, I think I did start to recognize the patterns, and then I didn't even move as much. I realized, I guess you didn't need to necessarily. So I did get better at it, but I still
Which is also
don't love that.
why for this game, it's rancidly unfair. There's no save or checkpoint system, because part of the reasons modern games are fun. I actually don't have that much experience in this genre, but games like Dark Souls or Elden Ring that are punishing, but are pretty much like this old school mindset of you have to learn the strategies and the patterns of your opponents and your environments again. And you do get punished by losing loot and gear every time you die. However, you don't have to start from the very beginning of the game. So that there is something to be said. I think it would have benefited, because I do fully respect and appreciate that satisfaction of somebody who can sit there in the original game mode as intended and try again and again and learn these patterns again and again and again. It's amazing, really.
And I meant to say this at the top, but audience, if you've never played this game, if you've never seen this game, I do recommend, go on YouTube and search Death and Return of Superman playthrough. There are a bunch out there. They're like a little over an hour, not that you need to even watch the whole thing, but just kind of scroll through it just so you can sort of get a sense of, more of what we're talking about. All right. So I guess zeroing back in on these levels, the last thing I just wanted to say about that first cyborg level is, and again, a little nitpicky, but rather than have the boss be this sentinel robot.
Yep.
As a comic book fan, it would have been cool where in Cadmus, maybe if he had fought Guardian, something like that.
Yes.
Would have been cool.
That would have been very cool. I agree with you.
So he hurls Doomsday into space. We're done there. Then we get the next two levels as the Eradicator. Level 4 is called The Last Son of Krypton, appropriately. And then level 5 is Ambush at Coast City. So in level 4, you're back on the streets of Metropolis at nighttime. You're the Eradicator. You're busting heads. You square off against Steel at the end.
As we touched upon, which is pretty cool and pretty jarring, right?
Yeah, and again, like Steel kind of sets him straight, right, and sends him on a better path, and so he, in level 5, again, Ambush at Coast City. The first portion of that is aerial, and then he's on the ground in Coast City, and he's fighting off the War Worlders. Now, we get an upgrade here, right, with some of these archetypes. The Warbot, in particular, has these retractable claws, I guess.
Yep.
As if the game weren't hard enough. Now this bad guy can reach you and pull you in.
And that's what we were talking about, why we like Steel, right? Because that added distance, it kind of the theme of what we've been talking about with the gameplay mechanics here, right? It's it takes your ability to maneuver, and basically, if you had a couple of seconds before to kind of think of maneuver, this gives you probably, oh boy, I don't know what the hitbox is necessarily, it's off the top of my head, but that thing came at you fast and it reached far. So you really had to make a split second reaction when it was coming at you. I agree completely. I also want to throw one very silly fact out, considering I don't think we're going to be talking about Eradicator that much more here. There's something in my very silly brain that made me laugh, that in Eradicator's level, you're playing at night. Yes. And he is the only character who is wearing sunglasses. And to me, it was just like, boy, what a tool wearing his sunglasses at night. Nobody has any respect and love for the Eradicator. So that tickled me a little bit.
It's his look, man. It's his thing.
It is his thing. It is his thing. It just was funny that's like the nighttime level that we see, and he has his sunglasses on. It made me laugh.
I hear you. And, when he's in Coast City, I mentioned the Warbot with the retractable claws. So Tick from the Underworlder level is reimagined here as Razorback, but not really reimagined. Basically the same.
Right.
Basically,
there's a skin. Yeah, they reskinned him.
And this brings up something that we hadn't really talked about yet: the vehicles. Mm-hmm. Right. So there are instances in almost every level where one of the bad guys will be in a vehicle, whether it's Molotov or Chainsaw on the motorcycle, or, Tick, or now Razorback in the little hovercraft. And I actually, those were kind of fun, because, again, you would do your jump attack or flying and then kind of land, and you can knock them off, and then you could pick up the vehicle and throw it. I actually kind of like that.
Yeah, no, it was fun. And it gave some nice diversity, and also add a sense of gravitas in the middle of the levels too, which is always fun.
Yeah. So at the end of level 5, and again, that's what's so cool about this. You're playing as each of the Supermen,
Mm-hmm.
And then they're also the bosses, right? So you play as Eradicator, you fight Steel, they part on okay terms. At the end of level 5, you fight Cyborg. And,
Yep.
you know, you beat Cyborg, but then you lose, just as Cyborg does in the comics.
Yep. Yep. And it does such a good job of the conflict, because instead of showing you that they're in direct opposition to each other, the fact that you have to play each other, and the fact that like you have to play also like not on the just or moral end, like when you have to fight Steel, for example, I think goes a long way of kind of putting you in that uncomfortable place with what's happening, which I think was a really cool design choice and storytelling choice.
Totally. So that brings us to the end of level 5. We're halfway through the game. And now we get our level as Superboy, right? And the Metropolis Kid.
Metropolis Kid. I love that.
This was such a long level that at a certain point I thought I was on to level, I thought I was on to level 8. No, I've lost track of my numbers here. 6. Yeah, you start as Superboy in level 6.
6, right.
Yes, okay. And then there was a certain point where I was like, okay, we're on to level 7, but it was still level 6. There were a few different components to it.
There's definitely some discrepancies in level length. Like there are definitely some levels that just seem outrageously longer than the others. Yeah, I'm in full agreement there.
But yeah, you start off on the streets of Metropolis, and we talked about the agility of the character and I guess Superboy's special attack really is that tactile telekinesis that you see in the comics,
which is super cool. Again, talk about like source knowledge and like love and reverence for a character. Like they could have just had him like punch somebody really hard, but they went and they actually used that tactile telekinesis, which I thought is another point in these folks knew what they were doing and cared about what they were doing category.
Right. So we get a pretty long level as Superboy, and then in between scenes, the return of Superman, right, in the black suit. But then to your earlier point, level 7, you play as Steel. It's not like Superman. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not like you play as Superman, like Superman comes back and then you play as him instantly. It's you're Steel for an episode called Steel Reign, where Steel goes to Engine City. So, we're getting deeper into the reign of the Superman storyline now. The note that I made here was there's no boss at this level. It's just very long and difficult. You're like...
I thought at one point there might have been like an emulation error or an error, because again, that goes to kind of what we were saying before about how challenging the norms, how cool would it be if Doomsday kept coming back? Like we're so trained to, we get through these levels, we get a boss, we're out of there, but not the case this time around. And I don't know why. I'd be curious to know why necessarily, because I don't think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that serves a particular narrative purpose that I can find off the top of my head, right?
No, not really. I mean, yeah, Steel has a more critical part to play in a couple of levels, right? Mm-hmm. When he's in the engine room. But yeah, this, not really.
Yeah, which is interesting, which is funny because that's overall like my favorite moment of the game when you get to play as him after that. But yeah, leading up to it, it's a strange choice. The level is long and there's no actual boss in it. So I don't know. Yeah. Who knows?
Well, look, it keeps you on your toes, right? It definitely varies the formula. So I'll give them that.
That's true.
And then, so in level 8, you play as Superboy again for the final time. He's escaped from the Eradicators or from the Cyborg's clutches, right? And he's trying to stop this missile that's headed from Metropolis. Cyborg is trying to do to Metropolis what he did to Coast City. Yep. And so the entire level here, again, there's no boss. You're just fighting... You're fighting the missile as these other objects are coming at you. This was different. Like this was, again, my perspective is skewed. Absent Infinite Lives, I might not have enjoyed it as much, but it was fun. I kind of appreciated the little change of pace with this.
And I'll tell you why I appreciated this more so than our kind of us scratching our heads without having a boss in the Steel level, right? So with this, I'm okay with there not being like a traditional boss in a sense and having to fight the missile, because we've already seen intimately what happened to Coast City. And there's such a panic and dread that you're like, we cannot let this happen again. We cannot let this happen to Metropolis. And I think that enough, at least for me, from a narrative standpoint, is enough for me to be like, all right, Metropolis Kid, you gotta now is your time to shine, to be a hero. You gotta stop this missile at all costs. So that gravitas, I think, still rung true for me.
Totally. Yeah. No, Metropolis Kid, man, he delivered. And then we get to the penultimate level, and what's this called? The Engine's Core. This is probably my least favorite level. I did not like this one. This is where you play a steel. You're in the engine room, in what remains of Coast City, and I don't know. How would you describe this level?
Coming off of fighting a missile about to destroy Metropolis, we're always taught in storytelling, right? You want to escalate, then dynamite, right? At the end, right? Then you're going to come down. I felt like we needed to keep escalating after that. Oh my goodness, this missile is going to destroy millions of people's lives. It's going to destroy the city. Look at this. We just saw skeletons laying around in Coast City. We cannot let this happen again. And then just to go to Steel battling through. And I love Steel, and it's funny. I found like I'm at such a juxtaposition because his moment of first playing as him is my favorite moment. But I feel like it's a bit of a letdown when I wish that we could have done something more to keep just escalating and bringing the story up from there. And I think maybe that's one of my, at least from a narrative standpoint, I think one of the problems. I felt a little bit deflated coming off of the last level to this one.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I don't know how well it tracks given the progression, like you're saying, that you would expect. I guess just from a playability angle, it just kind of frustrated me. There's all this electricity, like these, electrical beams that you have to sort of, time correctly to get through.
Yeah, that's always cheap. To me, that's a little bit cheap in games. It's frustrating. It's one thing if you're going toe to toe with an enemy, but like in environmental hazards that are put to merely like impede the player, never were my favorite. Put it that way. There's just such a wide window for frustration there, I think. Because it's not like, oh man, that enemy killed me, I got to try harder. It's, oh no, like this awesome superhero jumped and got his head shocked by this electric beam, and now he's dead. So it's just, it doesn't always work for me in that sense.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It was not my favorite, and absent cheat codes, I think I would have. I don't know. I never would have gotten that far in the game to begin with, but I feel like that level in particular. Have
you ever heard of, I feel like I ended up talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles a lot this episode, because a lot of their games are most similar to this, which is kind of cool, and of the similar time period. And there's an NES, somebody out there, again, please hit us up if you remember this level. In the NES Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, there is a level that is infamous, Anthony. Infamous. You could bring this up if you meet somebody who's like really into video games, had an NES, ask them about an NES, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the underwater level. I believe it was right before the dam. It is such a notoriously hard and difficult level. And for the same reasons you just described, because of the environmental hazards, and you're underwater and you keep getting shocked, you keep getting hit. And so similar how many people, we'd love to meet somebody who beat that game. If you found somebody who beat Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on NES and got through that water level, you deserve a medal, a handshake, a parade, whatever we can give you. So there definitely is like a theme, I think, to a certain point of just these environmental hazards being so frustrating. So I definitely think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. And then we have our final level here, level 10, the Return of Superman. We touched on it before. It begins with the Eradicator restoring Superman. He's back to life, back to full power, back to his costume.
He's good. Did good in the end, the Eradicator.
Making his way through Engine City. It's, War Worlder after War Worlder. It's relentless. I mean, this was tough. This was where, especially on my second playthrough, I was using those special attacks left and right because they just kept coming. And then ultimately you have your final showdown with Cyborg Superman. And that's the end of the game.
Yeah, and that's all she wrote. I mean, yeah, the last levels usually are the toughest as an ultimate skill check of everything you've learned, right? The ultimate culmination of everything that's come before. But it's a great journey. It's a great ride.
Are there any Easter eggs, any special moves, like anything that you came across in your playing or your reading that I haven't mentioned that I wouldn't have even known about that you came across?
Everything that came to me and that I noted, I've talked about already. And really it just comes down to the overall faithfulness And I think the narrative choices. So again, I've said this already, kind of at the top of the show. I went into this immediately and was like, I'm going to be impressed with how the graphics look and how the music held up. Like that's pretty much, I think, what I'm going to take away from this. And I was blown away with how faithful and how much reverence it was. Again, the details with the finisher moves of our less than moral Superman, right? That I think is such an indication. And even the little cutscenes, like we talked about too, as limited as they were, really were enough to kind of show that like they understood the source material. And I guess what it comes down to is they didn't just prove to us that they understood the source material, but they wanted other people to understand it too, because they went a long way of being able to really get and grasp what's happening, at least in a broader stroke in the story by playing this game.
Well said. And that's, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about it. I mean, you could have done a version of this game where you don't have those cutscenes. I mean, it could just be you fight the Underworlders, you fight Doomsday. Maybe you have a little bit of something after Superman falls. And you can play as each of the 4 characters, and there doesn't necessarily need to be a narrative. You could just be the Eradicator busting heads on the street. You could be, Cyborg going through they could have stripped a lot of it away. But I appreciate that they didn't. And now look, I mean, if you go to look at this, it's relatively simple, but it's enough there.
It's still effective. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I really did appreciate that. No, I mean, that's the thing. It's like any gripes that I might have, anything that is on my wish list that didn't make it in, it's only because I already like the game so much. And there's like a couple of things that it's like, we could have gotten even further, but this leads, I guess, to the question that I mentioned at the beginning that I said we would end with. And, when you were on the show previously, we talked about the notorious, Superman 64 game that has gone down in infamy for being such a terrible game. But
I have a Nintendo 64 in storage, right? I'm just going to say that. I'll leave that there. You can take that any way you want it.
Well, listen, audience, if you like hearing us talk about Superman video games, you would want to hear us talk about Superman 64, like, let us know. I'm game. No pun intended.
We might need to be extra buttered up to put us through that crucible. For you good folks, we'll do it.
I need some encouragement, but in your estimation, for all the games that you've played, that you've read about, that you've written about, especially when it comes to Superman, do you think this is the best of the Superman video games?
Yes, I do. And I think the answer, the follow-up question is that because this game is great? And is it because there just aren't that many good Superman games? That's yes and yes again. All of that, in my estimation, happens to be true. We already kind of poked fun at the notoriously, tragically underdeveloped and mechanically just broken Superman 64 we talked about. Now, there are plenty of other games where Superman appears in. I'm actually glad. I was wondering when I was going to get to bring this up. This is the perfect time to do this. But just not too long ago, a few short months ago at this point, a game was launched by Warner Brothers called Multiverses, right? It's kind of their version of Smash Brothers. It's a platform fighter. Heavily leaning into DC amongst various other characters from other franchises. The point and relevance here being is that Superman is one of the very first characters in that game. So if you're looking for a game that came out this year and you want to play as Superman, you could do a lot worse. Now, that doesn't count necessarily, right? Because it's not a Superman game. It's not about him. But I just thought it was interesting, right, that we were going to have this conversation. And what's really, really cool is, and I'm actually just double checking right now to make sure I'm right, but it's actually George Newbern who they got to do the Superman voice, which I actually thought was really cool because they could have gotten anybody. I thought it was pretty cool that at least they got George Newbern to do that and chime in with that as well. So there's a lot of faithfulness, and it's just a cool little side note. I'm not saying you should drop what you're doing. It's free to play. It'll cost you nothing to play if you can download it. But if you want to play around as Superman in a modern experience too, just fighting other characters, sure. That being said, that's not a Superman game. We already touched on Arkham Asylum and the Batman games, right? When we talk about superhero video games, just in general, in my estimation, the very best ones are, and I think people would be hard pressed to disagree with me. Please let me know otherwise. But the Arkham games developed by Rocksteady that you just talked about. My personal favorite is Arkham Asylum because it's that claustrophobic kind of feel, which I think is very, very frightening. You get that kind of gothic horror with Batman in there too. That's awesome. The Spider-Man, Insomniac Spider-Man games, which are just absolutely wonderful. Anthony, as a Spider-Man fan, at some point we have to. There must plays for you. Their stories, I'm not going to say they're the best Spider-Man stories ever because that's ridiculous. They are on par with at least the better half of a bunch of the media, and probably even the top 25% of the media of Spider-Man that's been out there. The stories and acting are just gripping. And there's actually been, the first Spider-Man game, and there's been a Miles Morales game. There's another one coming out now that has both of them. The storytelling, the acting is beautiful. Everyone should play them. They're wonderfully written with love, reverence to the source material, and care. I would love to see your reaction to playing them. I found myself moved to almost tears at some point playing them. The story was actually so powerful. They're fantastic. I also love the Guardians of the Galaxy game. That was a huge surprise. I'm going to say something that's an incredible take that I'm sure people will argue with me for, but it's fine. Play the game and talk to me. I'm almost willing to say that that's my favorite version of the Guardians of the Galaxy in that video game. They actually won a bunch of BAFTA awards for the voice acting and storytelling in that game. They're phenomenal. Where am I going other than talking about comic book video games I like? I'll tell you, this is all coming home. For years and years and years, the people who made the Arkham City games, the Arkham games for Batman, Rocksteady Studios, have been rumored to be working on a Superman game. And everybody has been so excited. You know, there are some people, of course, who do what they always say. Well, how could you make Superman interesting? How could you? It's the same argument we see in comics and video games, that old trope that hopefully they'll be exhausted by soon enough. We still haven't seen that. Unfortunately, their new game that's coming out is a Suicide Squad game. Superman is in it, interestingly enough, but as a Starro-controlled villain, as they have to fight the villains of the Justice League. So, yeah, I'll play it. We'll have some fun, but still not what we want. What we want is a Rocksteady developed Superman game using the mechanics and world in the Batman games. Because other than that, this was great and it was such a gem and a surprise. We have not yet had the truly great Superman game. I hope that's not a never. I'm choosing to believe that's ahead of us. We're not there yet. So I don't think that game exists yet is my answer to you.
No, thank you for laying all of that out. I mean, as you're talking about it, and I won't derail us, but I can't help but think of the state of DC films, right? And the fact that, we have not had a solo Superman movie on the big screen since 2013.
Yep. Almost a decade now.
A decade. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
And there's so much more to say about the state of DC movies, but just this idea that this is this iconic marquee character with so much potential to appeal to an audience and just not being exploited on the big screen, on video game consoles.
Yeah.
So even as someone who's not a gamer, but as someone who loves the character and someone who would really appreciate a Superman video game, I hope that we get to see something like that. In the meantime, we do have this, and it's not nothing, and at least we have this.
And if I could sum it up, this game is an overachiever. It's an overachiever. It blew away my expectations, and it should be allegedly accessible, ish, by completely legal means, to be able to play and experience and enjoy. And you're right, because we always do try to bring it home, even with sad events or the nitpicking that we sometimes do. We always, and one of the things I love the most about you and this podcast is just, we always bring it back to the positive and the positivity and the hope, right? How fitting for a Superman podcast. And we are thankful that we have this game, and it makes me hopeful for when we really get the game that we've been waiting for.
Amen, my friend. Well, listen, like I said before, it was a gift really to be able to travel back in time and play this game and to have this conversation. I mean, that's the thing. Like I said, I think back to that summer upstate when I played it for the first time, and then, the times to follow when, when I had it for myself and, couldn't beat it, couldn't get too far in the game, but it was something that, I still remember to this day. So to be able to see the game all the way through and to have a conversation like this, it really means so much to me. So thank you very much. Thank you to the audience for tuning in. I always appreciate it. And I especially appreciate it for an episode like this, where we're talking about a video game, which is different than what we typically talk about. And I hope that you stuck with us for it, and I hope you enjoyed it. Jeremy, thank you again. And I look forward to the next time that you and I can do this.
It's a pleasure, my friend. It always is a pleasure. And today, especially, you really put chocolate with my peanut butter by combining two of my loves like this. So thank you so much. I've had such a wonderful time, and I look forward to talking to our audience more about all this.
Right on. Thank you all. We will be back next week for the next installment of Til Wedding. And until then, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the show and receive exclusive additional content, including my DC movie rewatch podcast, at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Thank you to all patrons for enabling me to produce this show. Also, be sure to explore the other shows within the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, which is home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, all hosted by yours truly. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts. Visit flatsquirrelproductions.com for more. Thank you all.